Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the .NET Foundation Project Spotlight, where we talk about great projects in the .NET ecosystem and how people can help contribute to them. So I'm super excited for my guest today. My guest is Troy Hunt, founder of Have I Been Pwned. Troy, you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Yeah, g'day. I'm Troy. I started Have I Been Pwned December 2013. It's getting old now. It's almost as old as my children now. Is how old. It'll never be as old as my children, but you get what I mean. It feels like a long time.
Sure, sure. Well, for people that might not know about Have I Been Pwned, do you want to talk just a little bit briefly about, what it is and how .NET developers can tune into it and see some of the things that you're doing there?
Yeah, look, for the most part, it's pretty simple. It's a data breach aggregation service, and there's really two parts. One part is there's a lot of email addresses in there, about 11.5 billion email addresses from previous data breaches, and you go to the front page, have it been pwned, and you put your email address in, and it's like, yeah, you've been pwned. Here's all the places that you've been a data breach. And then the other part, and this is the part that we've now rolled out through the .NET Foundation, is this pwned passwords service, which is 600 and something million, I forget the exact number, 600 something million passwords from previous data breaches that other organizations then refer to as essentially like a disallow list. It's like, these are passwords that are known bad, they're breached. And that sits behind an anonymity API that gets hit almost 1 billion times a month at the moment. So that's what we've rolled out and open sourced into the .NET Foundation.
That's great. I think the first thing that people are probably curious about whenever they get an opportunity to chat with you is like, why? Like, why? What was it that was about breaches in particular that got you so interested in it? And obviously, with your security background, your technology background, you were probably like, well, I could probably fill a gap here.
Well, to be honest, it was equal parts two different things. So part of it was I wanted to build a data breach notification service because I thought it was interesting for people to see where their data had been exposed. And this was just after the Adobe data breach in 2013. And my data was in there twice. And I was kind of surprised by that. I was in there twice because it was like my personal address and my work address. And I'm like, why does Adobe have my data? I was sure I never gave Adobe my data. And then it's like, oh yeah, but I was a big Dreamweaver user. So I gave Macromedia my data, and then Adobe bought Macromedia, and then my data flowed, and it's ended up in these places I never expected to. I reckon that's interesting. Maybe other people do. So that was part of it. And then the other part of it, in all honesty, was I just wanted to build some stuff on the cloud. So
Yeah.
I was working for Pfizer at the time. Everyone knows who Pfizer was now. We used to have to go, Viagra? Yeah, we make Viagra. Anyway, it's that company. The vaccine company now, we know them as. And I was making a really big push to try and get us into the cloud, and particularly into PaaS. I really, really wanted to push the PaaS bandwagon. And Azure was just sort of at that point. For Americans, that's Azure. Microsoft's cloud was just at the point where there was enough sort of maturity to have some really good platform offerings. So I was like, hey, why don't I take the data breach thing, and then I'll whack in 155 million something records in table storage, and then I'll use an app service, platform as a service on front of that. It'll be fun. Some of my mates will use it. Now here we are.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think one of the things that really resonates is that you just want to build something, right? So I think one of the things that's really interesting when people talk about like starting up like an idea, right? The first thing they probably think about is like, will other people use this idea, right? After like you get to a proof of concept, right? You did it to solve a problem for yourself. How quickly did you figure out, oh, this could be something that a lot of people could take advantage of?
Look, I think it was about 3 weeks. I think it was still December 2013. And the main reason was that it actually started to get visibility in the press. And that's what kind of really surprised me about it. And when I look at it now, it's kind of interesting. Like I got a lot of friends, probably got a lot of common friends in the .NET world and in the open source world who build really, really cool technology things. A bunch of them we all probably use ourselves. But my mum and dad will never read about it in the newspaper, or they'll never hear about it on the radio. And that's what made Have I Been Pwned really different. And that's what really sort of got attraction. It's like suddenly, it's on CNN. How'd that happen? It's like, why is it on CNN? Well, because it's a mainstream consumer-facing service, and that's what got the interest that I just didn't expect.
Yeah, I imagine that was a very interesting moment for you, right? When, oh, like, look, mom, I'm on CNN. Like, I imagine that your life, I don't want to say your life changed overnight because that's cliche, but it was one of those things probably where you're like, oh, well, this is probably something that I just can't, it's not something that just I can just put away really easily, right? Something that people actually pay attention to. And, you mentioned, millions upon millions upon millions and billions of requests a month, right? Like it's nothing
Yeah.
small.
It's been really interesting, and what's been particularly interesting is that I basically wanted to do Hello World on the cloud, but actually be useful, right? So I
Sure.
wanted to build something that would serve a purpose. And I thought what would be fun is to sort of push. I thought it was going to push table storage, putting 155 million records in it. Of course, now there's what are we at? 100 times that.
Yeah.
and so far, touch wood, it's actually running quite well.
Yeah.
But the bit that I didn't expect in terms of like pushing boundaries was seeing traffic. And the traffic was actually really interesting because it wasn't just like large amounts of traffic. It's the way traffic ramps up and then backs off. And I was so excited about things like auto scales. Oh, this is so cool. It's like when I need more platform, I'm just going to get more platform. And then when I need less platform, I get less platform. And I had not thought through many of the things that would later happen, such as it would be on like primetime British TV, Sunday night. And it's really interesting when you're on TV, and it wasn't me, but it was the service, obviously, because you've got let's say it's millions of British people sitting around in their lounge rooms drinking their tea, and it's on the TV, and everyone like picks up their device at the same time and enters the URL at the same time. It's not like it's in a link somewhere in a story and people gradually come across the story and they read at different rates and they get down to there and your traffic ramps up. It's just like traffic, bam, straight like that. And stuff stops working in a PaaS world the way I had it configured at the time. So this actually gave me like lots of cool opportunities to go, all right, well, how do we architect this thing so that not only so that it can deal with that, but so that I can still run the service for free as well?
Yeah. I imagine that there's an opportunity probably, and I don't know how much of a masochist you are, but you could probably take a snapshot of those requests and like, the point in time where you became famous, right? Like, because it's flat, 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 and then this huge spike. Like, I'd imagine that being like a picture frame that goes on a wall somewhere, and people are like, hey, what's that? And it's like, oh, that's the time that I got famous.
Trends.google.com. Have I been pwned? I've actually got a pretty good idea of when it's not ever been sort of consistent, which is part of the interesting thing. But January 2019, here it is. So January 2019 is the point that's at 100. Actually, no, this is interesting. Why is this? Oh, I need a longer period of time. This is only over the last year. But January 2014, I knew was kind of really, really crazy because I loaded this like massive 700 something million record credential stuffing list. Now that is the biggest spike. Yep. But to answer your question really specifically, it looks like around about March 2015 is when at least the search history really started to trend up.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think it's super interesting, especially with How I've Been Pwned, is that it's not just it. It originally was just you coming up with the Hello World and the Cloud Serve concept, but I think very, very quickly, like government entities took a look at it and said, "Oh, we could leverage this in a positive way." So how was that experience like when governments across the world are reaching out to you? It's like, hey, so your data, can we like use it?
Well, it was really interesting that the first sort of government relationship, and just to quantify this, there's 22 relationships with different governments around the world at the moment, and these are giving the governments API level access to query all of their government domains. So often there's like an allow list based on a TLD, so star.gov.au, for example. And this came about because I was in London doing a user group one time, and it was massive. So this was at Skills Matter in London. There were a couple of hundred people there, and like I do my talk, and then people are asking questions, and someone asked me a question about government, and this was, I think, like Snowden memories were still really fresh, and this guy's like, "Isn't the government just always out there trying to get you? They're trying to screw you with your data," and I'm like no, they're actually doing really, really cool things. And everyone I've met in government has been super awesome. They're paid a fraction of what they would be anywhere else, but they're trying to make a difference to the world. And every single person I met is someone you like to have a beer with. So then someone from the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, came up to me afterwards and he's like, "Thanks, man. Like, we just don't get enough love." And we sort of struck up this relationship and started having this discussion about, well, would this data be useful? And he sort of said, "Yeah, but look, it's really hard to get paperwork through government. It's really hard to get money from government." I was like, all right, I'll fix that. No paperwork, and just have it for free, and,
Yeah.
and that will be fine.
Yeah.
And now I'm actually literally maintaining a little black book of every government I've got that is on the list yet to come. This is my Australian Cybersecurity Centre book. So there's a pipeline in here. So I've knocked off Trinidad and Tobago, Dominican Republic, Finland, Belgium, Paraguay, and Uruguay. I got both the Guays, which is good. And we just keep working through governments, and it's cool to see like national certs excited about this and tweeting about this. So I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, it's really crazy to think about that. Like you actually have a list of like governments that you want to interact with to like help, broaden their security paradigms, which I think is awesome. I want to kind of pivot a little bit to, your experience as somebody who's recently open sourced something like this, right? Like what has been the general like community feedback? Obviously before it became open source, a lot of people knew about it. A lot of people had an understanding from your blogs and other things about what was a part of the underlying process, the infrastructure and the services that you were using. But once you actually open sourced it and people had the opportunity to help contribute, like what was that experience like for you?
Well, the response was really positive. I think everyone has a place in their heart for open source code and the intentions behind open source code, because the intentions, like I'm yet to see someone open source someone and go, they're up to no good. The intentions are always good. Now, I announced the intention to open source in August last year. And then it took us until, when was it? Probably May this year. It was about a month ago. So it took quite some time. And I think that what has been interesting is to just sort of separate the public perception and the expectations of open source with the reality of it. And what I mean by that is that when I announced it in August, I think a lot of people were like, oh, cool. So now you just basically make the repo public and job done. It's like, no. First of all, it's only ever been me writing it. And I know I've put stuff in that code base that I shouldn't have. It's in revision histories and things. So I've got to have like a clean version of that. Also, I want to do this in part to reduce the dependency on me, but I know that by doing this, I'm actually going to increase the dependency on me, at least in the immediate term, because now I'm going to start getting all of these PRs and there's going to be lots of good ideas. So I was worried about that. And fortunately, after I did open source it, and it is a very discrete, finite, manageable piece of code, there were a bunch of PRs, which was great. And a bunch of them came from a friend of mine who was one of the first adopters of Have I Been Pwned Passwords into EVE Online, the massive online multiplayer game. So this guy had years of history. We've had beers together around the world. He's someone I knew and trusted. And I was like, can I give you the keys? And you can start being a little bit responsible for accepting PRs. And that's helped a lot. So I was really hoping to have people from the community sort of step up and want to not just contribute code, but I guess start to shepherd the direction that it goes as well. And I hope that there's more of that moving forward as well.
That's great. I think also one thing that's really interesting with that is that, like you mentioned something that I find is very compelling. Like you meant, like it's your app isn't something like groundbreaking, right? It's not going to turn the world upside down by it's not sophisticated algorithms. You're not going to make millions and millions of dollars with the tech itself. But like the implementation is simple enough that people can help contribute to. Even though at the end of the day people see security and they're like, oh, I don't know, like security might be a bit terrifying. I'd like to get your thoughts too. Obviously now that it's open source, and people can contribute to it. And you mentioned something that I think is very interesting about stepping away, not stepping away per se, but Troy doesn't scale very well long term for an open source thing of this magnitude, right? So what are your thoughts about bringing on co-contributors or co-maintainers to your project and having the ecosystem grow that way?
I'm also only a few meters away from the water full of the sharks.
Sure.
So I need a succession plan, not just the sharks, but the jet ski. I'm not sure which one's more dangerous, but anyway, so there needs to be survivorship for the service, for the service as a whole. And at the moment, obviously, we're just looking at this Pwned Passwords bit. And what I like about the idea of open sourcing, not just the code, but for Pwned Passwords, we could actually open source the data. In fact, the data was already open source. All the data had already published out there anyway. So what I like about this is that not only can people just pick it up and run their own, But people can also use the online service. They can use the APIs as they stand, use the anonymity model with the confidence that if I do have a shark-related incident,
Sure.
they can turn around on the spot, take all the code, take all the data. Maybe they have to invest a few days of effort or something, but then stand up their own implementation. So I think it's really important that in order for the service to grow, people have confidence of its longevity. And ultimately, this has always sort of been the goal, right? Like the best possible thing we can do post data breaches is make this data as broadly available as possible for the right purposes. And whatever road leads us in that direction, like that's the one to follow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear, right? You're not in this to make a bunch of money. You're in this to amplify potential opportunities where people can kind of get hooked, right? Like, I think that's something that's really, really impactful, right? It's not like you're not selling a service. You're giving away the access for people to be able to do things on their own, right? If you,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, and look, that's always been the first priority. And as I said publicly many times before, there are parts of Have I Been Pwned people pay for, and there's 1Password product placement there, so I do earn from that. But particularly the pwned passwords bits, there is no channel by which that earns any money whatsoever, unless it's like someone pops up and says, "Oh, I really like your pwned passwords. Can you come and speak at our commercial conference for us and talk to us?" Yeah, okay, right. I'm going to charge you for my time. but I can't sell the passwords or the service because all the code's out there for free and all the passwords are out there for free.
yeah. I mean, then thank you for kind of steering that the right way. I think one of the things that I think is really important to call out is that like the things that are in the open source are to be used by everybody, and they're only to help better society, as cliche as that sounds,
That's it.
right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So one of the things that I think as we're wrapping up that I think is really impactful is like, say for instance, I'm a .NET developer and maybe I've been using the service for a bit. I go to haveibeenpwned.com all the time, and I want to I want to get a better understanding of the work that you've done and maybe contribute. Like, what are the best ways for folks to do that?
Well, there is a Have I Been Pwned repository, github.com/Have I Been Pwned. I managed to rescue back that repository from someone who was squatting on it, I was actually very happy about that. So anyway, you can go there. That's got, there's actually 3 repositories in there. So there's the Have I Been Pwned passwords Azure function and the storage implementation there. There's another repository that's got all the Cloudflare workers. So there's some really, really cool stuff that happens on the edge. And for the super nerdy folks, there's another repository with a 3D model STL in case you really, really want to 3D print the Have I Been Pwned logo.
Oh,
so
man.
that's there. And I welcome pull requests on that repository too.
Oh, please do. I want to see the most sophisticated Have I Been Pwned 3D prints. That would be really, really cool. And then they can just go all over the world, right?
That's it.
So again, Troy, I want to thank you so much for hopping on, chatting with us about the Have I Been Pwned project and the fact that it's part of the .NET Foundation. Do you have any closing words or anything additional you'd like to say?
No, look, I mean, other than to thank everyone who's actually been contributing to it, because there's a lot of people that have contributed, if not code, then they've contributed data that they've found floating around the place, or just given it airtime and given it exposure, and that's made it what it is today. It'd be nothing if it was just me sitting here in isolation doing it. So it's always been a community effort, and I'm glad that code is now there in the community as well.
Awesome. Well, again, Troy, thank you so much for hopping on and chatting with us. For the folks checking out, so the Project Spotlight page is going to have a ton of information about Have I Been Pwned and how you can give back or just learn more. So that's everything for me. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers.